Welcome back, everyone. This is the wide receiver and tight end matchups episode. I went over some quarterbacks and running backs in yesterday's episode, so make sure to check that out. It was a short one, so it won't take you too long to get an idea of the quarterback and running back landscape going into week 4. But we got to talk about the Lions-Packers game from last night, Zach. The biggest contention is with Jahmyr Gibbs' usage, right? Or lack thereof, I should say. But Zach, dude, like, how high is the panic meter on your end for Jahmyr Gibbs right now?
I'm not hugely panicking. Obviously, it seems like it's easy to say, yep, it's a 10 on the panic meter. On a 1 to 10, 10 being worse, it's easy to say 10. I'm going to go ahead and say 5 because we did kind of see this as a possibility. I'm more pissed off than panicked, if that makes sense, because we've seen this story before. It happened last year with DeAndre Swift and Jamal Williams, and David Montgomery is the second coming of Jamal Williams in this offense. Now, I think David Montgomery is a little bit better than Jamal Williams. Just if you look at him objectively, I think David Montgomery he's still a good running back. But what has people most riled up is the fact that Jahmyr Gibbs was drafted so high, and we heard all this hype coming into the season about how he's going to be used, and it's not matching at all what we heard. And we saw it last night too. What is David Montgomery doing getting 32 carries? I mean, I know it was a positive game script, but you have two very good running backs. It's not like Jahmyr Gibbs can't run the ball. He's good at catching the ball, but he should get some carries too. He had 4 targets last night. Dave Montgomery, you mentioned it before, I think in the one post that we're putting out, like, why is he getting targets over Jahmyr Gibbs, even in a positive game script? Like, if you're gonna be running a screen route, you're gonna put Jahmyr Gibbs out there. If you're gonna be running any type of route in the backfield, just move the ball forward, nice and conservatively. You want it to be Jahmyr Gibbs, but it hasn't been the case. I'm not panicking. I'm definitely concerned. I'm not panicking. I still want him on my team, Jahmyr Gibbs, but I'm just pissed off more than anything.
This was definitely the worst possible game script for Gibbs. They went to locker room at halftime 27-3. Okay, this is a David Montgomery's game script the whole way through. Like, we know that. Okay, and we did a lot of podcasts this summer, Zach, and we knew what these roles were going to look like for the most part. Now, it hasn't quite shaken that way, but we knew that David Montgomery was going to be the early down back. We knew that he was going to be the goal line back, and we knew that he was going to be running some routes on early downs, and that's fine. But Gibbs is sitting at only 20% of the rushing attempts, when Montgomery's in, not moving past the 50% route participation mark, which is key for him to get those targets. And, we need him to get to like 65% route participation. That's what we need, okay? And that's without him getting more work in the run game. Now, if he gets like 40% of the rushes, that would be ideal, because then at that point, he'll be like a low-end RB1, right? He is getting targeted at a very high rate when he's out there. 36% targets per route run last night. But, he ran less routes than David Montgomery, okay? 26% routes, targets per route run coming into last night. But we need more routes, okay? If we get more routes, we're sitting pretty, but it's just not looking great at the moment. And we also need more intricate routes, right? Like, not just like these, go 5 yards and turn around type of routes, right? Like, how is Montgomery getting targeted on swing routes right now, right? Now you're just trolling us at this point, right? So I know it's frustrating. I don't want to sell Jahmyr Gibbs for peanuts. Okay, I either bench him or I lower my expectations, continue to start him as a low-end RB2. That's where I'm downgrading him to at this point. Because there's a good chance you cannot sell Jahmyr Gibbs for good value right now. So I'd probably hold. There could be somebody like a 3-0 team that's willing to do something, and they have the ability to be patient, and they're willing to give you something legit for Jahmyr Gibbs. If that's the case and you need some wins, I totally understand. You don't have the luxury to be patient. I get that. So go for it. You can trade away Gibbs, but just know that he will have some upside later. Now, I want to say something about Montgomery getting all this work, right? Like, he had 32 carries in this game or something crazy? Yeah, I'm not surprised, man. Like, I don't look at this situation as, like, the Lions are up all game. And I don't want them to give... I mean, even if I had Gibbs in my fantasy team, like, I would want Gibbs to get some of that work. But, like, who do they really, really need, right, in this offense, like, down the stretch? Right, when in the games that are close, in the games that they need to win, who do they need? They need Jahmyr Gibbs, man. They don't need David Montgomery, okay? Like, David Montgomery is not somebody he's not the reason why the Lions won last night. You know what I'm saying? Like, he's not the reason they won. Now, he happened to be the one toting the rock, but it's not like he was, like, making crazy plays. or anything like that. He's not why they won. He's a good goal line back, sure. But Jamal Williams was a good goal line back last year, and look at him now. Okay? Replaceable. Jahmyr Gibbs is not replaceable, right? So when they get to a certain point in the season, I think they're going to start using Jahmyr Gibbs a specific way. And why show anything with Jahmyr Gibbs right now? Like when you're up by so many points and you have the game locked down. So it just sucks the way that this is unfolding. It's frustrating, and it's just unfortunate for anyone who has Jahmyr Gibbs on their fantasy team.
Yeah, very unfortunate. And I think, like you just touched on it there, like it's unfortunate, but like you would be lying if you said you didn't see this as like in the range of outcomes, what we're seeing so far, right? Because we know what this coaching staff does. They did it last year with DeAndre Swift and Jamal Williams, and like everybody was hoping this would be the time they change course because they drafted him in the first round, Jahmyr Gibbs. And if you saw the video of them in the war room, it was like they were so excited about this pick. Like you'd be thinking there would be more substance to that than just what they showed. Like it would show up on field, that excitement, but it's not. But I also agree with you too. You mentioned like the Lions; they've been in pretty positive game scripts. Even last week, they were up, and Jahmyr Gibbs got the rushing work. He didn't get a whole lot of receiving work. That's what we're kind of pounding the table for right now.
Next week
and
too.
It's going to be hard.
Next week they got the Panthers.
Yeah,
it's gonna be bad.
It's just ridiculous. Like until we see a truly like negative or very close competitive game script, that isn't week 1 against the Chiefs because they were supposedly limiting his work just while he gets acclimated. Until we see that moving forward, it's going to be more of these performances. The only thing you have going for you is that at least he's consistent. I think he's put up like 9 points 3 out of 4 weeks. Like what you're getting at this point. He's not leaving you completely hanging. So that's one thing. If you want to hang your hat on something right now, you could maybe do that. But also with the trade talk about trading for Jahmyr Gibbs, he's a buy, but I think only if you're winning, because at this point, it might take a little while for him to, turn things around in terms of production. And if you're a team that's losing, like don't go swinging for Jahmyr Gibbs thinking you're going to get this all-world talent when you're not doing good enough already. You need to fill some holes in your roster. Jahmyr Gibbs isn't going to be able to do that in a short turnaround right now. I'm thinking 3 or 4 weeks out, I'm kind of forecasting him to have maybe a larger role. Hopefully, that is the hope.
Yes, I would agree with that. And by the way, we shouldn't be surprised with Montgomery's role. Like I said, he's playing the role we thought he would play as the primary early down back. He's just running more routes than I thought he would. And remember when we told you to take the over on David Montgomery's 6.5 rushing touchdown mark on the season on Underdog? Yes, it was set at 6.5. Okay, on Underdog, his rushing touchdown line. And we told you to take the over before the season, and guess what? He's already at 5 touchdowns, okay, through 4 weeks. Unfortunately, Aaron Jones came back to not do much in this game. Hardly played in the first half. Only 35% of snaps. That's not going to get it done. Seems like he was still limited in this one. Same with Christian Watson. He ended up saving your day with that touchdown, wide open touchdown. If you had the cojones to start him, he saved your day with that. He ran less than 50% of routes, okay, on Jordan Love's drop back, so he was still working his way back. He should hopefully get closer to 100% in week 5. But Romeo Doubs was the one who came through on 13 targets in this one while Watson was ramping his way back. I think Christian Watson remains a buy low. You still have an opportunity if you weren't able to just yet. And maybe we can start asking about, Aaron Jones as well, if you don't have those guys rostered.
I think what we got from Christian Watson was like acceptable if you started him. I know I started him. I had Romeo Doubs and Christian Watson, and I was like between them. I wasn't sure who I wanted, and I ended up putting in Christian Watson. He did save me. I'll give you that. But Romeo Doubs, he got the majority of the targets. We heard coming into the week that they were going to kind of work Christian Watson in, so I don't think anybody was like too taken aback by like, oh, well, Christian Watson, he got severely out-targeted, by Romeo Doubs. That's not going to be the case, I think, moving forward as he gets healthier. This was his first week back and his first game this season. So once Christian Watson's back in the swing of things, he should, I think, take over as a clear wide receiver 1 here in Green Bay. And then going on to Aaron Jones. I mean, Aaron Jones was doing his best A.J. Dillon impression. Obviously, it was on limited work, but there wasn't a whole lot going on there. None of the Packers running backs were useful last night, and that comes also from being in a totally negative game script the whole time. And you're not going to be able to do much as Aaron Jones. If he didn't look like 100%, it didn't seem like they were treating Aaron Jones as 100%, even though they played him in this game. If this were a Sunday game, maybe Aaron Jones might have played a little better. But the fact is, it was on a Thursday, so they took it easy with him. I'm not worried about Aaron Jones at all. There's nothing to be concerned about. Just wait for him to get healthy, and he should be back up and running for the rest of the season. But until that happens, this is the type of production that we might see, especially with the way the game went last night.
And I would expect this type of production when any running back goes up against the Detroit Lions. I would look at the Detroit Lions up there with Tennessee and all of these other elite rushing defenses because they have been putting clamps on running backs this year. And it started on the low. It started in the second half of last year. And they're just getting better this year. All right, this is a good Lions team, man. All around. Defense, offense is looking pretty good. All right. Oh, yeah, and I want to mention Luke Musgrave. He had a great matchup on deck, dude. But he ended up getting concussed in the first half. He was on the field for every snap before he left the game. Who knows if he'll play next week. Unfortunate. All right, let's get into some wide receivers for this week. We have the usual suspects at the top of the wide receiver rankings. You know who you're starting in that upper echelon. I did move Keenan Allen up to my wide receiver 3 on the week. His usage is just bananas right now. Michael Williams is out for the year. So 32% target share for Allen on the year. Right now, he's just balling out. Okay. I have Diggs, Adams, Jamar Chase up there, obviously. Olave, I have him at 7 against Tampa. I'm not sure that most people have realized this, but Olave has been running a lot more routes from the slot this year. He's still primary perimeter, but 42% of his routes from the slot this year so far. He's going to avoid Carlton Davis a good amount, although Davis hasn't really been lights out this year anyway. But Tampa is giving up the 10th most fantasy points to slot wide receivers and the second most to wide receivers who line up on the left perimeter. And Olave has run 63% of his routes from those spots so far this year. He's averaging 100 receiving yards per game, and he hasn't scored a touchdown yet. And I think that's coming. Could be this week. Jameis Winston's going to be heaving that rock down the field at him. We know that for sure.
Yeah. And could that increase his touchdown upside? Maybe. The Saints offense hasn't been explosive. It's been good enough, to get them some wins. They kind of cooled off at the end of the game last week against the Packers. Obviously they allowed the comeback, didn't do a whole lot of scoring, any scoring at all, I don't think, in the second half. But with Jameis Winston at quarterback, I think they're going to be fine. We talked about this a little bit earlier this week on the podcast. I think that Derek Carr and Jameis Winston are very similar in that they want to push the ball downfield. Jameis Winston, he's going to spread the ball out, I think, a little bit more. But I'm not worried about Chris Olave at all. You mentioned those touchdowns coming. I think that's definitely something that we can expect sooner rather than later for Chris Olave because he's looking like one of the best receivers in the league, not just second-year receivers. We talk about the breakouts that he could have. Him, Drake London, Garrett Wilson. Not only out of those guys, obviously he's having the best season, but just among wide receivers in general. If I'm not mistaken, I think he's one of the top graded players overall in the NFL right now in PFF. Like, he's doing his thing, and he's getting those targets. The way he's producing is actually really encouraging because he's had 3 good performances without touchdowns. And if you can get that on a weekly basis, like you're getting it with Chris Olave, when those touchdowns do come, we're talking like wide receiver 1-2 finishes on the week if you can get those. So I'm in on Chris Olave this week. And the matchup against the Buccaneers, they just got torn up in the rain by AJ Brown. So I think that he has a good shot of coming through this week.
Man. I have Puka Nacua at number 8 this week among all wide receivers. He's in a pretty good spot this week, isn't he?
Yeah, he's in a fantastic spot. But don't you find it hilarious that Puka Nacua, he had his first quiet game of his career in week 3, and people were up in arms about him not coming through for them? Like, this is a guy that spotted you 30 points that you weren't supposed to have right off the gun in week 2. And I'm not even going to say anything about week 1 because nobody had him in their lineup in week 1 unless they were really desperate. He had 21 points that week 2. So this is a guy, like I said, we talked about him. You weren't supposed to have this value, but now you do. You can't get upset over one matchup. But the scenario that you're walking into right here with Puka Nacua, this is a guy that's got a 33% target share in the season, 31% air yard share, going into a matchup against the Colts defense that's allowed the 7th most fantasy points to wide receivers so far. And remember, can you name any Colts corner off the top of your head right now? Go. No,
yes, I can.
Oh, who you got?
I got, let's see. Nope, I can't. Dallas. Isn't there, don't they have a
Dallas Flowers? Yes. That's the only one that you can remember.
Banged up, I think,
because I think he was in the preseason. Something like that. They're very young, and they've allowed a lot of points already so far. Puka, he is not just a utilization king. Like, you can look at receivers who have these utilizations, like 33% target share, 31% air yard share. You can see that on Fantasy Life. awesome tools over there. Looking at the game log, you can see every week. But he's not just a utilization king. He's turned that opportunity into production. He's leading all rookies in yards per route run right now at 2.68, which is also good for 9th in the NFL overall among all wide receivers. And he's been, for lack of a better term, the poor man's Cooper Kupp. And Stafford's dropping back to pass at the 3rd highest rate in the NFL. I mean, you can't tell me there's anything not to like about this matchup. Last week, he was a little bit, he didn't come through so much. Matthew Stafford was a little off, but he was also coming off of that, they called it an oblique injury, something like that. He should be healthier this week going into a great matchup. Puka Nacua should go back to doing the things that we saw him do in the first 2 weeks.
And by the way, things aren't super optimistic when it comes to Cooper Kupp's return. It does not look like he's coming back week 5. It's not, we were just talking about that. Like, we're not hearing anything. And it turns out that we did hear something yesterday, and it wasn't ideal. And they're hoping that Cooper Kupp can come back at some point, was the words. And that's not what you want to hear. We want to hear, he's on track to make his return week 5. You know what I'm saying? Oh, he might need another week. Not, we're hoping that this is going to be okay. And if you have Cooper Kupp and you've been banking on him coming back week 5, this is not ideal at all. So
I was gonna say, I think you have to go into week 5 assuming you're not going to have him. That's what I would do. Because then you cover your bases, and if you end up having him, then that's fine. But you can't assume that he's going to be back at this point with the report that we just heard.
I guess I'm starting Adam Thielen for the rest of the season in my Yahoo league. Oh well. I went against Austin Eckler. I went against, check this out. I went against Austin Eckler in that league last week. Okay. Austin Eckler kept Brandon Ayuk in his lineup. He didn't set his lineup, and he left him in. Okay? He got 0. Ayuk got a 0, obviously, because he didn't play. I still lost. I still lost, Zach.
Hey, that's fantasy football for you. That's fantasy football
lost.
for you. We had that happen in my one other league. I had another guy who he didn't change. He changed out. He missed 2 players in his lineup. And he started, miraculously, Devon Achane.
Unbelievable.
And if he didn't have Devon Achane, he would have finished with like 70 points on the week. But he had Devon Achane by some miracle in his lineup. Yes, he won because he had Devon Achane.
That's so good.
But he was missing 2 guys in his lineup.
God.
That was actually my cousin. It's hilarious. If he's listening to this, I'm just shouting you out right there.
That's so good. That's so good, man. Oh, my God. All right. About the wide receivers, I have A.J. Brown at 9. I had Amon-Ra sitting at 10 coming into Thursday night. He ended up saving a night with the touchdown. I did predict him to go under 72.5 receiving yards last night on Underdog. That one worked out. This is 3 games in a row now where Amon-Ra went under 60 yards receiving against the Packers. Okay. So I'm gonna keep an eye on there. All right, so moving out of our top 10, let's talk about some matchups that we like this week outside the usual suspects. If Deebo Samuel plays, I want him in my lineup this week. We talked about the man-zone splits between him and Ayuk. Arizona plays zone at a 65% clip, so that's considered high. So that would favor Deebo, which is why I have him ranked as my wide receiver 15 on the week. So pretty high for him. He is dealing with a rib and a knee injury, so kind of banged up. There is a chance he doesn't play, but we'll see. He did not practice on Wednesday and Thursday. And if he doesn't play, Ayuk and Kittle would obviously get a bump if he were to be out. Okay. I have DK Metcalf at 13 this week against the Giants. I'm really interested in this matchup against Deonte Banks, which is, who is the Giants' first-round rookie corner. He's been playing very well over the first 3 weeks of the season. He's allowed the 3rd least fantasy points to wide receivers running routes on his side of the field. And that is where Metcalf gets most of his run from. This is still a behemoth of a man. Pause. As my underdog guy, Cameron, would say, in DK Metcalf. So I'm not really worried. I'm just interested to see if Banks, is a corner that we might need to worry about moving forward, because he did show some good things in the first few weeks of the season.
Right, he did. And I'm not too worried about DK Metcalf in this matchup. Geno Smith, the thing for me that's most encouraging about DK Metcalf moving forward is that Geno Smith has looked more like Geno Smith the past 2 weeks. That first week, I was a little worried, especially against the Rams. I was like, I don't know, this could it be a flash in the pan? Geno Smith put those worries to rest pretty quickly. He's back to throwing at a high volume. He threw 26 pass attempts in week 1, and now he's up to 36 and 41 over the past 2 weeks. That's exactly what we like to see. I still have my quips about the way they're using Jackson Smith and the Jigba. We'll talk about that some other time because it's just stupid the way they're using him right now. But Tyler Lockett and DK Metcalf, you mentioned he has a good matchup against Deonte Banks. We'll see how it goes. I think that DK Metcalf can be started this week, and you don't really have to worry about him because he's getting the targets that we like to see.
I have T Higgins at 14 this week. I really like him against Tennessee. Joe Burrow isn't at 100%, but he's probably doing better this week than he was last week. And Jamar Chase had a great day last week. 85% of Higgins' routes are run on the perimeter, and the Titans have given up the third most fantasy points to perimeter wide receivers so far through 3 games. According to Fantasy Life data, he's at his usual 24% target share for the season. That's the same exact target share he's had all of last season. So despite a couple of bad games, don't get cute with it. Okay, make sure Higgins is in your lineup because we could see a repeat of what we saw against Baltimore in week 2.
Yeah, and this has been the nature of T. Higgins' production. You know, it's not going to be like perfectly consistent, but when he has those big games, he's winning you your week. That's just the way it is. And Jamar Chase, having him on the other side, has caused that somewhat. The only thing that worries me a little bit with T. Higgins is obviously the way Joe Burrow's playing. He looked a little bit better. He should be a little bit healthier. He looked a little bit better last week. He should be a little bit healthier this week. The matchup, like, do you think the matchup offsets that concern right now? Because the Titans, they're allowing a lot of points. Like, there's a give and take there. And I'm looking at T. Higgins and I'm like, I'm not sure I like Joe Burrow, but at this point, like, can you bet against him? At some point, Joe Burrow is going to turn things around and look like Joe Burrow. And if it's this week in a good matchup against the Titans, not only does it have a higher probability of it happening because it's a good matchup this week, but if it does, Joe Burrow can really capitalize, and T. Higgins is going to be a big part of that. So I agree with you here. I'm just a little more hesitant. I might have him a little bit lower than 14, but there's no problem on my end for me if I look at this and say, like, 14 is not out of the range of outcomes here for T. Higgins.
The reason why he's at 14, to be honest with you, is to make sure that people know that he should be in your lineup. Like, don't even think about it. You know what I'm saying? Because there's too much upside here, right? You know what I'm saying? There's too much upside for him to be on my bench. Like, even though I might be wary and all that kind of stuff, which I am. I'm not like, I don't think this is a slam dunk by any means, but like, make sure he's in your lineup because the upside is too much to like leave out of your lineup this week. Now, I have one request for everybody listening. If you can take out just a second to go hit subscribe or follow on your podcast app, that would be amazing. It would mean the world, and it really helps us out a ton. So, and also if you have the time, rating and reviewing the podcast would mean the world as well. A lot of questions around Calvin Ridley, and we do, we also have some questions, right? I have him ranked as my wide receiver 16 for the week. He's going up against Atlanta. Revenge game for Calvin Ridley. Unfortunately, the Falcons have been pretty good against wide receivers so far this year. They're allowing the 6th least fantasy points. The thing is, the Falcons haven't really faced crazy competition on the perimeter, right? And which is where they've been most stout at this point. The Panthers, they play the Packers, the Lions, right? For the Lions, like Amon-Ra runs most of his routes in the slot. The Panthers, their best receiver, Adam Thielen, runs most of his routes out of the slot. So, not the best matchup in the world. I did downgrade him to a wide receiver 2 this week because of his performances over the last couple weeks. So we'll see how he fares. But I think he should be in lineups though, like regardless. Like we do want that 18% target share that we saw each of the last 2 weeks to come up. After he had that 35% target share in week 1, it was looking so promising. I think he can bounce back at some point. If it's not this week, hopefully next week. But I think at some point he's going to at the very least, be a high-end wide receiver 2.
Yeah. I think that's how he should be ranked. And then you look at Calvin Ridley, you mentioned that target share has come down a little bit. The offense overall has just not looked good. And like I keep going back to this with the Jaguars. I think it's going to turn around. And they're in this funk right now. Trevor Lawrence, he's playing good, but they're just having like these bad streaks of just bad calls, bad outcomes for these plays, like a bunch of drop touchdowns in week 2 against the Chiefs. Like all this stuff is happening. It's going to get corrected as the season moves forward. And Calvin Ridley, I'm not worried about him at all. You mentioned him, the Falcons, who they have allowed some of the lowest fantasy points to receivers. I think that's something it's like fake. You know what I mean? It's not necessarily indicative of
fake news. Fake news.
It's not, fake news. You could go like that. But what you're seeing is a lot better than, what we might see after this game. I agree that the Falcons haven't been tested on the outside. I think that Trevor Lawrence is going to be the best quarterback they've played against yet this season. Obviously against the Panthers, against Bryce Young, you're not really scared of him if you're the Falcons in week 1. Jordan Love, he had a quiet game in the one, a relatively quiet game in the game against the Falcons. And then also Jared Goff last week, it was just positive game script, so they didn't have to throw the ball a whole lot. I think that all contributes to that number kind of being a little inflated in terms of how good they are against wide receivers. And this could be a matchup where they're exposed a little bit here. And like you said, maybe there's something to be said for the revenge game aspect of it for Calvin Ridley. I don't think there's like bad blood between them, but I think definitely here playing against his old team, he has a shot to turn things around.
I think he's going to kill it. Revenge game. Uh, Amari Cooper's at 19 for me this week. Another good matchup at home against Baltimore. Their secondary's banged up still. They've given up the sixth most fantasy points to wide receivers so far through 3 games. I have Elijah Moore down at 40, so he's a solid flex play this week with Marlon Humphrey still not practicing. And Elijah Moore did get 9 targets last week. He caught all 9 of those targets. He's at a 25% target share on the year, according to Fantasy Life Utilization Report. So kind of sneaky moving forward. If Deshaun Watson starts playing well like he did last week, we could see Elijah emerge as a more reliable option. And on a per route basis, Elijah's averaging more targets than Amari Cooper right now. But overall, Baltimore's given up the 6th most fantasy points to wide receivers so far this year, so Cooper is a great play.
Yeah, no, I agree with you 100%. And it's interesting for me, you look at Elijah Moore, he had a pretty decent target share, the first 2 weeks. He had 23 and 22 according to Fantasy Life right here, and it jumped to 29 last week. But what changed when he got that jump in target share was his air yard share. It went from 24 and 29 the first 2 weeks down to 5. Like they weren't targeted. It was all underneath stuff. It was all in the backfield, that kind of stuff. There was nothing going on downfield for Elijah Moore. I think he has that in his game. So I'd like to see that, continue moving forward like they did in the first 2 weeks. I'm not too worried about that not happening. I think they will get back to that. But Amari Cooper is still the play here. He's the wide receiver 1 clearly. But Elijah Moore, he's looking like that second option in the receiving game, which is really encouraging. We were talking about that coming into the season. Could he be that? It looks like they're using him the way the Jets should have when he was with them in New York, because Elijah Moore, he's got the talent 100%. And the way that the offense looks for the Browns, I think they're still working through some things. Deshaun Watson's still getting back up to speed, but last week was definitely encouraging. Obviously it was a good matchup for him last week, but if Deshaun Watson can keep playing like he did last week, which still isn't even his ceiling. We've seen that, those years with the Texans. He's not even close to being at that point yet. If he can continue to improve, Elijah Moore could become more reliable as a starter moving forward. I think we could see him higher than 40 in a few rankings, moving forward.
Agreed, man. I really like Jakobi Meyers this week as well. It really hinges on whether Jimmy G plays or not. He did get a limited practice on Thursday. He's still in the concussion protocol, though. But getting a limited practice on Thursday is a good sign. We'll see what happens today. Still up in the air at this point, though. We mentioned earlier this week in the buy-sell episode to go get Jakobi. Okay, 38% target share, 27% target share, and this week against the Chargers, who've been giving up the most fantasy points to perimeter wide receivers, lining up on the right side, and the second most to slot wide receivers. And Jakobi runs 79% of his routes combined from those 2 spots. Okay, so needless to say, he has a pretty good matchup this week. I have him at wide receiver 23. But I would move him down just a little bit if Jimmy doesn't go.
Yeah, I agree with you here. I think it does hinge on Jimmy Garoppolo playing. I think he has a chance to play, if I'm not mistaken. I saw a report that he was practicing this week. So that's encouraging, definitely. This is exactly the type of matchup you want, like you mentioned, with Jakobi Meyers, especially if Jimmy G goes. Like, he's going to continue to play well. The concern is if a backup would come in, like Brian Hoyer or Aiden O'Connell, like if one of them would come in, they're probably going to key in on their top weapon, which is going to be Devontae Adams. I'm not worried about Devontae Adams in this matchup at all. Fantastic matchup for him. He's going to be fine. But Jakobi Meyers, he's going to be good if Jimmy G plays. Like you mentioned, I think the floor is a little lower if Jimmy G doesn't play, because I'm not sure they're going to key in on Jakobi Meyers like they would Devontae Adams. But I'm with you on this one. And with the buy thing, we talked about it on the episode before. We don't have to reiterate it. Like Jakobi Meyers, it's not new for him to be demanding targets. He's been doing this his whole time, the whole time in his career, even on a bad Patriots offense.
100%. And so I have Nico Collins and Tank Dell back-to-back in my rankings, Zach. What do you think of these 2 guys this week?
I think it's hard not to love them. You know what I mean? Not just for fantasy, but just in general. And having them back-to-back, I think makes sense because they both have like this element to their game that's different than the other. Nico Collins is usually the deep threat, and Tank Dell is usually the guy underneath running intermediate routes. That role kind of switched last week, but I think that's just going to keep happening moving forward. Not only did the Texans have a great matchup against the Steelers this week, is they're allowing the 5th most fantasy points to wide receivers, but CJ Stroud, he's also dropping back at the 2nd highest rate of any quarterback in the NFL. and his 140 dropbacks are the most in the NFL, as of week 3. Obviously, last night, the game would skew those numbers, but 140 dropbacks, obviously very high through 3 games. And that's allowed all 3 of the Texans' top receivers, Collins and Dell, and then also Robert Woods out of nowhere to see 20 targets apiece so far this season. Stroud's been really accurate, and I really love the way he's playing right now. He's delivering a catchable ball over 70% of the time to all 3 of the receivers that I mentioned before. And the Texans are going to be competitive. And it's not just going to be like this fluke thing through these first 3 weeks where they're going to be competitive. They're going to be competitive all season. And in this game with the Steelers, with a high passing volume like we've seen, Dell and Collins, they should be able to get it done for you as wide receiver 3s with pretty good upside.
Yeah, I would say so, man. Pittsburgh has given up the 3rd most fantasy points to wide receivers running routes on the left perimeter. That's where Nico is lining up on a majority of his perimeter routes. So I have him ranked over Tank by 1 spot this week. They're sitting at 24 and 25. So both kind of low-end fringe wide receiver 2s for me this week.
Ranked over Tank. That's hilarious.
Yep. Courtland Sutton, he's received pretty good usage the last 2 weeks with Judy in the fold, 27% and 29% target share respectively. And now he gets a good matchup against the Bears on the left perimeter where they're allowing the 4th most fantasy points to wide receivers. So Sutton ranked, he runs almost 50% of his routes from that left side, so he's in a good spot this week. I have him at wide receiver 27. I have Adam Thielen at 30, Zach. How are you feeling about him this week with Bryce Young back?
Not so good with Bryce Young. That was my problem, looking at, we talked about him as a potential sell, I think it was 2 weeks ago. And that was after the Monday night game where they scored a touchdown late, and that was it. Adam Thielen's production came on that touchdown, and I said that he should be a sell. And then Andy Dalton comes in and he throws for hundreds of yards, and Adam Thielen suddenly wide receiver 1. And this is the second, maybe the more notable revenge game. He's going against the Vikings here. No, I'm kidding.
That's right.
Anyway, it's the Adam Thielen revenge game.
Zach, do not downplay this revenge game. Do not not do it. Okay, this is huge. This is huge. Yeah. Okay, so you got to upgrade. I'm moving Adam Thielen up in my rankings as we speak. Go ahead though.
It has to happen. Yeah, so the Adam Thielen revenge game, he's really the only reliable wide receiver for the Panthers in fantasy through the first 3 weeks. And Bryce Young's at quarterback again, so I think that ceiling has to come down a little bit. And it's another one of these like give and take things where we talked about, like T Higgins, the matchup is good, but Joe Burrow might not be completely healthy. Here it's the matchup's good, but the quarterback might not be that good because it's Bryce Young. But the matchup is good enough against the Vikings to make him a worthwhile start as a high-end wide receiver 3. They're allowing the 3rd most fantasy points wide receivers overall this season. And something to keep in mind is that Thielen had a 26% target share last week, even with DJ Chark in the lineup, who had 19% target share himself. That was with Andy Dalton at QB. We did hear reports coming in the season that Chark and Young, they had a strong connection in camp, and they'll be on the field for the first time together this season, DJ Chark and Bryce Young. Not saying it's going to happen, but it looks like there's a chance that DJ Chark could have a higher target share than he did last week coming off of that injury, and Bryce Young at quarterback. I don't want to pump the brakes too hard here on Adam Thielen because, like we said, it's his revenge game, but it's something to keep in mind because we know DJ Chark, he was lighting it up in camp with Bryce Young.
I have Terry McLaurin at 33. He could see a lot of Darius Slay in this game, but he's had success against Slay in the past, so I'm not super worried about that. The Eagles have allowed the 9th most fantasy points to wide receivers, the 8th most to perimeter wide receivers, and they've been just vulnerable all over the field. So I'm not like super concerned about McLaurin this week, but what I am concerned about is his overall target volume, right? He hasn't received that elite target share this year. The ball's kind of being spread around a little bit too much. That's the thing that's concerning about McLaurin, not getting that those 10 plus target games that you would want an elite wide receiver like McLaurin to get.
Right, and part of that I think comes with Sam Howell, being a quarterback, and he's only making, I think it was his 4th start, and last week it was just abysmal. Obviously against the Bills, he couldn't get anything done in the passing game. Sam Howell had 4 turnovers, that's not what you want to see from your quarterback. But outside of that, like Terry McLaurin, he's been sitting in that range. I think he can get it done for you as a wide receiver 3. But you mentioned it, like the target share isn't there for him to have those boom games. And that ceiling is something that he doesn't have right now. And honestly, I don't think he really had this whole time coming into the season because Jahan Dotson's there. And it looks like they want to use the ground game with Brian Robinson and Antonio Gibson, even though Brian Robinson is dominating that. It doesn't look like they want to put too much on Sam Howell's shoulders. So that target share isn't there. It's not a ridiculously high passing volume, but he's also distributing the ball. I'm not thinking that Terry McLaurin is going to be like a common finish, he's going to finish commonly inside the top 24. And that's just like disappointing because we know the type of receiver he is, and he's dealt with, tough QB play his whole career. So we'll probably be left hanging still for the next couple weeks at least. I think it can get better. I think if Sam Howell, starts picking up a little bit, gets more comfortable in the offense, Terry McLaurin can start to see those target shares, but it's not going to happen soon.
Now, there are a few matchups that I'm not super thrilled about at wide receiver. Zay Flowers is one of them against Cleveland. They've given up the least fantasy points to wide receivers this year. Michael Pittman doesn't have the best matchup either. He will get the volume, though, most likely. But the Rams have been pretty stout on the outside, giving up the fifth least fantasy points to wide receivers so far through 3 games. But that being said, I'm still starting him as a wide receiver too. Okay. George Pickens, don't love his matchup. The Texans have given up the 7th least fantasy points to perimeter wide receivers so far this year. And DeAndre Hopkins, I really don't want to play him against Cincy. Who they've given up the 3rd least fantasy points to perimeter wide receivers this year. Out of those options, I'm going to take Michael Pittman out of this because I'm assuming that would be your answer. Who is the guy that you would most likely play out of this group between Zay Flowers, George Pickens, and DeAndre Hopkins?
It has to be Zay Flowers for me. And I'm a big Zay Flowers fan. He's getting the target share. And Michael Pittman obviously would have been my pick. He's getting the target share. But Zay Flowers is the one that's getting the most consistent target share here. And I talked about George Pickens, I think it was on Wednesday's episode, about selling him because the target share is there right now, but he's still not doing like a ton with it. And a lot of his production came on 1 touchdown this past week. So I'm not in on George Pickens. I don't think that the offense is as good as, the Ravens can be, especially with Zay Flowers. He's pretty much the guy there. Rashad Bateman and Odell Beckham are both banged up, so he's going to be getting the targets. If not as the number 2, he could be the number 1 option in this offense, the way that he's been getting targeted from Lamar Jackson and Mark Andrews working his way back. And DeAndre Hopkins, I'm just really not interested in also. I agree with you here because it's just been an injury saga so far, and it looks like it's hampering him to this point, and it doesn't help having Ryan Tannehill at quarterback. It's going to keep your ceiling pretty low as a receiver. So I'm going with Zay Flowers pretty easily here, even though it is a tough matchup against Cleveland.
I think I'm with you on that one. And you can check out the rest of our wide receiver rankings and all of our other positional and flex rankings on our website at upperhandfantasy.com. Let's go to tight ends now. I had Luke Musgrave in my top 10 from last night. That obviously didn't work out. Left the game in the first half with a concussion. But you have the usual suspects at the top. Mark Andrews does have a tough matchup against the Browns. I got a lot of questions about whether to bench him for Laporta. Laporta didn't have this amazing game, but he had a decent game last night considering the game script. But now you have kind of hope that if you played Andrews, that hopefully he could have a better game. But tough matchup against the Browns. But I'm not considered benching him or anything like that. Okay. I have Kittle at 4, Waller at 5 against Seattle. I think this could be a game for Waller. Finally, would you agree? Like, is this a game where Waller, this could be his coming out party a little bit?
Yeah, it has to be. I mean, you look at the defenses he's played, like I mentioned, the Cowboys where they put up 0 points, the Giants offense as a whole. Then they played against 49ers, 12 points, and we just know that the 49ers are a good defense. And in the one game where it was a negative game script, obviously coming back against the Cardinals, he finished as a tight end 4 on the week. So I'm not worried about, what's his name, Darren Waller here. I think that this is the first true, like maybe competitive game that we could see where it's not like some skewed game script and we're not sure what we're going to get from Darren Waller. I think we could finally see him in a competitive game. And I think the target share is going to be there. Like if he gets 7 or 8 targets, I'm happy because you're not going to get a whole lot of that across the rest of the tight end landscape.
I hear that, man. Okay, so I had Laporta at 6, Evan Ingram at 7, Goddard at 9. I skipped over Luke Musgrave, who I had at 8. And then it gets really iffy, right? At that point, I have Hunter Henry at 10, Jake Ferguson at 11. By the way, Ferguson leading all tight ends in 15-plus yard targets and red zone targets combined. Okay, so something to look out for, especially in a position where like you just want some big plays, maybe you just want like a touchdown, that sort of thing. I think Jake Ferguson is a decent bet. You watch the Cowboys, you're a big Cowboys fan. Like Jake Ferguson's pretty startable, isn't he?
Yeah, he's startable, 100%. But it's funny because like I was going to take a moment to shit on Jake Ferguson here a little bit because I'm not a humongous fan of this matchup. It's fine, but I hear you. Like for getting it done in terms of just put him in your lineup and not think about it because there's nobody else that you're really going to trust right. in this on your team. Like Jake Ferguson's going to get it done. But for me, I just look at the Patriots. They've allowed just 4 points per game to tight ends through 3 weeks, and he's got a 19% target share. He does, Jake Ferguson, according to Fantasy Life. But he hasn't been able to capitalize on that volume really much. There hasn't been, he had a 1 touchdown. I think it was in week 2 against the Jets, but he's posting just a 58% catch rate 3 drops through 3 games. Dak Prescott's dropping back at just the 18th highest rate in the NFL. It's just right in the middle. It's a far cry from what we thought we might see. And a pass first offense, it hasn't really been that this season. So they've been able to push the ball downfield. They're not scoring the touchdowns. And that's where the upside came from. That's what we were looking at, in terms of will Jake Ferguson be able to break into that upper echelon of tight ends? He hasn't been able to do that yet. And the Cowboys still have no receiving touchdowns from wide receivers. So you got to believe that they're going to be trying to get the ball into their hands a little bit more. CeeDee Lamb in the red zone. I think Jake Ferguson, he's a fine start, but I'm not looking for a whole lot of upside here. I think having him at 11, that might be his ceiling this week.
Yeah, okay, I hear you. It's interesting because, like you mentioned, he's getting a high target share, but he's not getting the route participation. Not anything anywhere close to a full route participation, but he's still getting the target share. So it seems like when he's on the field, we talked about Dak loving his tight ends on a target per route run rate. The Jake Ferguson is getting a high target per route run rate right now. So if he gets more route participation, if he gets up 80%, he could easily be a top 10 tight end the rest of the way. So we'll see if that ends up happening. I think it can. Now, Kyle Pitts is at 12. He has a great matchup against the Jaguars. His usage is iffy. But the good thing is last week he had a 24% target share. The bad news is that he only had 56% of his targets deemed catchable, from Desmond Ridder. Who would you rather play this week if you had the choice between Pitts and Ferguson?
Between Pitts and Ferguson, I think I'm going to go with Pitts.
Okay.
Just because the usage is there.
I'm officially moving Pitts up my rankings, and I'm switching these two. I appreciate the analysis there.
Yeah, the insight. I just think he has to be there. The volume is much better with Kyle Pitts, even though, maybe the targets, the accuracy of the targets, the quality of the targets he's getting, not fantastic. We've seen how many shots of Kyle Pitts running downfield and the ball just sailing over his head or falling way short. But I think at some point he's going to have some form of encouraging, upside here. I think that he could cash in this week.
All right. Sounds good. I got Friday with a 13. Really a crapshoot towards the end of this list, but you have a tight end, do you have any flyers at tight end that you could potentially throw in, if you're really desperate?
Yeah, I think Okonkwo against Cincinnati, could be a potential throw in here. He's fallen short first few games of the season, but he's got a solid matchup against the Bengals. They're allowing the 6th most fantasy points to tight ends. Okonkwo, he has a 17% target share in each of the past 2 games, but what has my attention this week is Treylon Burks. He has a little bit of a knee injury right now, and I'm not sure if that's going to hold him out, but there's a chance that he could be limited or maybe not even play. He had a 26% target share last week, and there's a chance that the Titans fall behind and have to play catch up against the Bengals, which if Joe Burrow gets things cooking, that could be the case. They might have to use Okonkwo in the passing game to try and play catch up. Now, the Titans aren't going to be able to afford to use Okonkwo in the short game like they have the past couple of weeks. He has just 3% air yard share over the past 2 weeks if they do go down. And I think he can capitalize on that with potentially increased opportunity if Treylon Burks is out. Obviously a desperation play, but just somebody that's in that crapshoot range where if you're sitting there, maybe he's on your waiver wire and you don't have any tight ends still. You've been streaming the whole season. I think he could be an option for you.
All right. I kind of like that. I do see that his route participation is hovering between 60 and 75%. Not absolutely terrible, but on a per route run basis, he's getting targeted. So if his route participation just goes up a little bit, and they can get guys like Josh Wild and Trevin Wesco off the damn field and stop running routes, maybe we can get some production out of a guy who is obviously super uber duper talented on the field. That would be nice. Okonkwo could become the number 1 wide receiver at some point this year. It could happen.
That would be great.
It could happen, dude. You never know.
Who would have thought with DeAndre Hopkins on the team?
I know.
That would be the case. Will we see Will Levis anytime soon? Will we see
I don't know.
any other quarterback? I don't know.
I think it's going to be Malik soon, man. I think we can see it. I think it can happen because I think they desperately need something. They need some sort of spark. All right, guys. Again, you can check out our rankings at upperhandfantasy.com. That is going to do it for this episode. Thank you for listening, everybody. Please subscribe to the podcast. Leave a review if you can. And I will catch you live on Instagram at upperhandfantasy at 11:30 a.m. Eastern Time on Sunday, right before the games. Good luck this weekend. See you later. Bye-bye.